And paused, and you're good to go.
Perfect. Thank you, Sean. All right, we'll go ahead and share my screen here. Welcome, everybody, to the October 5th meeting of the Identity Special Interest Group at Hyperledger. Today, we've got two things going on, which is first the working group status updates, and then we'll also be seeing a presentation from Carla McKenna from Glyph and Lance Bird. So thank you both for joining us today. To kick us off, just a reminder that we are under the Hyperledger antitrust policy. So basically be nice to each other and don't say anything that you don't want public here. A few announcements. Animo recently announced making the Aries framework JavaScript a global framework. If you want to learn more, you can find out about that here. And the Identity SIG has a YouTube playlist, so you can check that out here. And then another announcement that's not here is IAW starts next week, so hopefully a few of you will be able to attend that as well. Moving on to some working group updates. It looks like the Hyperledger Indie Contributors Working Group was able to meet on the 26th of September. Was anyone able to attend this session that might be able to give us a quick summary?
I'm usually there, but I wasn't able to attend that one, so don't have too much more to say than what you have already written there.
Sounds good. Well, yeah, it looks like they're looking at some network upgrades and the Indie Ecosystem Summit meeting. The Hyperledger Aries Working Group met just yesterday, it looks like. Was anyone able to attend this session? I might be able to summarize it for us.
I was. We talked about the process of upgrading to both did rotate and did pure 4 as a method of migrating off of the unqualified dids that have persisted for a while in the Aries ecosystem, and then also in preparation of migration to didcom v2. So it's been the main topics for the last several weeks.
All right, awesome. Thank you. Moving on to Aries Bifold. Looks like they met on the 26th. Was anyone able to attend the users group for Aries Bifold? All right. Looks like they had a couple updates, and then we're looking at a machine readable governance presentation. Aries Cloud Agent Python. Was anyone able to attend this one just a couple days ago?
Yes, I was there. We we talked about the status of the 0.10.3 release, did peer 4. We talked about OpenID for VCI to start with, within Akapai, the use cases, requirements, approaches, whether it should be a separate service to Akapai or plugin to Akapai. So interesting discussions there.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Shar. Looks like Aries Cloud Agent Python maintainers met 9/26. Was anyone able to attend this session? All right, looks like they are focused on some PRs and planned PRs at the moment. You can learn more at the links provided here. Aries Framework JavaScript met the last week in September as well. Was anyone able to attend this meeting? All right, looks like they discussed moving to the Open Wallet Foundation and didcom v2. Let's see. Hyperledger Anon-Creds met earlier this week, it looks like. Was anyone able to attend this meeting? All right, looks like they were looking at some CredX stuff. TOIP has not met. Looks like the TOIP governance stack met on, that looks like today. Was this earlier today or is this later today? I think
it's later. It's at 2 o'clock.
2 o'clock. All right, we'll move on. Thank you. Technology stack working group met on the 3rd, though. Was anyone able to attend this session? All right. Looks like they had quite a few things to follow up on, and if you want to learn more, you can follow these links. Ecosystem Foundry has not met. Concepts and terminology looks like they met on the 25th for TOIP. Was anyone able to attend this session? All right. Looks like they were discussing some terminology engine stuff. DIDCOM, it looks like DIDCOM met on the 2nd of October. Was anyone able to attend this session?
I was. We talked about a handful of topics, including IW stuff, but also and a really cool DIDCOM demo, by the way. But the main item for discussion in that group is the potential to advance the spec to the IETF, which was the original plan, and was stalled briefly, and so reviving that is under discussion. That's a meeting that happens once a month, so it's a low cadence at this point.
All right, fair enough. Thank you, Sam. Appreciate the summary. The DIDCOM users group, I believe they've met recently, but was unable to find some info on them. Sam, would you be able to?
Yeah, we're less good at agenda items for that meeting. It is recorded, but the we've had under discussion updates to the DIDCOM book, and also the demo that I mentioned previously was of excitement there, as well as topics for IW, including a discussion about what's next for DIDCOM verifiable credential protocols.
All right, very cool. Thank you, Sam. I was unable to find anything on the interoperability group either. Has this group met recently, or is this June 27th their last meeting? Does anyone know? If not, we will move along. All right. IoT Special Interest Group looks like they haven't met recently, and we will call that the sorry, my mind went blank there for a second. That brings us to the end of our updates.
I need to, can I add something really quick?
Absolutely, Lynn, go ahead.
It's it seems important to mention that there have been some discussion. Maybe you already said it or it was in the notes, but I missed it. That there have been some discussions about joining the diff group with the Trust over IP group. The next meeting for the TOIP to discuss this is October 18th. They kind of put off their next meeting for discussions about that because of IAW. But there have been a few meetings. I missed the last several of them, so I don't have a lot more details on how that is going. But as rumors fly around, and you've heard any rumors about it, I don't know that any decisions have been made on that yet, but there are meetings discussing it.
All right, good to know. Thank you, Lynn. So yes,
can't confirm, Lynn, no decisions, but definitely discussions.
All right, sounds good. So yeah, look out. Which meeting again we'll have that discussion, Lynn? Will it be at TOIP or the diff on the 18th?
On the 18th, the TOIP has invited all of their work group chairs to a meeting. So it's not I don't believe it's an open meeting, but all the TOIP chairs are invited to attend a meeting at TOIP hosted on the 18th of October.
All right, sounds good. Well, yeah, I look forward to learning more then on that.
I just had a quick announcement as well, if that's okay, Tim.
Yeah, go for it.
Our next speaker in 2 weeks will be Daryl O'Connell of Continuum Loop. He'll talk about an update to the wallet report, the emerging trust layer, trust registries, and interoperability. So just a note about that for our next meeting. But back to you, Tim.
Sounds good. No, be sure to join us for that. That sounds like an exciting conversation. And I'll hand it off to Carla and Lance to take it away on their presentation for today.
Okay, thank you, Tim. It's been some time since we last spoke to the group, so thank you again for the invitation in order to be able to talk about the progress that we've made with what we're calling the VLEI or verifiable LEI. Our focus, though, has been actually on the usage of the VLEI in trying to make the link between the LEI, which is the identifier that we look after as Glyph. Would you be able to make that full screen, Lance?
How's
Okay.
that?
Yep, there we go. So first I wanted to give a brief background on the LEI, of course, which is the reason that Glyph started to think about the use of the organizational identity that we have in the LEI and its reference data in the area of digital identity. And then we will progress through the presentation of how we've refined the ideas since I last presented to this group, and of course, definitely since 2020, when we first unveiled plans in order to be able to leverage the LEI in digital credentials. And then I'll turn it over to Lance. I've asked Lance to join the presentation today because we have some current interoperability work that we've progressed to, which would allow operability between the VLEI and Hyperledger. So first, just maybe an introduction. Carla McKenna, I'm the head of standards for Glyph, and I also manage our US operations, our Americas operations located here in the US. Lance, maybe a brief introduction before we get going on the presentation.
Sure. I'm Lance Bird. I'm a software developer for Glyph, specifically working on the VLEI section and implementation. I'm also co-chair of the DID WebS task force within Trust over IP. So I will be talking about that.
Okay, so the next slide. Thanks. So a brief overview of the global LEI system, and then a lot of information on the need for secure, verifiable organizational identity. And then I'll turn it over to Lance for the interoperability work between the VLEI and Hyperledger, which actually is the DID WebS work that he just referenced. So next slide, please. So next one. So for anybody who's not familiar, Glyph is a not-for-profit that was put in place by the G20 and the FSB after the financial crisis, which of course seems like a lifetime ago. So after the 2008 financial crisis, where especially the financial regulators were looking for an international level, permanent, persistent, global identifier in order to be able to identify different types of entity legal forms, legal entities. And specifically using and leveraging this identifier by being able to track certain activities and transactions by firms in areas that were of concern because of the financial crisis. And so we're under regulatory oversight. If we go to the next slide, we see primarily the adoption of the LEI still in mandatory regulation and legislation that involve certain types of financial transactions and financial activity. And there are about 2.5 million LEIs that mostly cover the capital markets that have been issued to date. The next slide. Just a little primer on the LEI. It's an ISO standard. That's how I got involved with this whole world, being part of the group that developed the LEI as an ISO standard way back when the regulators put out that call. And the LEI is a code that is stood up by reference data, and the Glyph is responsible for managing the repository that contains these LEI codes and the associated reference data. So that's the background that we come from and why we have an identifier that we thought was useful in order to be able to start the journey on secure, verifiable digital identity for organizations. So the next slide, please. No, that's okay. And just continue to go. So organizational identity. We're looking at being able to satisfy the need for a person or a thing to prove their authority to represent an organization in some sort of way, but outside of the boundaries of that organization. And this is based on verifiable authority that the legal entity would be able to communicate within a credential. So if we go to the next slide, And this is the relationship, the representation that is at the core of the VLEI. Specifically right now, we're looking at a role credential. There are several types of VLEIs, but this is the one that we think really resonates with the foundation for organizational identity. You have an organization, they have people who represent them, either in official or functional or both kinds of roles, whether they're direct employees or whether they're consultants or partners, etc., in certain kinds of roles. And that's the situation in the real world. What we did was we tried to convert this into a digital representation, with the LEI representing the organization, the person being identified, and the role also being part of that credential, so that we can cryptographically bind the person in that particular role that's named in the credential to their organization that they're representing in that way. And through this, we start the chain of trust for the VLEI. We go to the next slide. So we've established the chain of trust. I think all of you know by now that we decided to employ the newer type of credentials of authentic chain data containers, ACDCs, for the VLEI, so that we could put in place a chain of trust, not only logically following the chain of trust where Glyph sits at the top as the governing body for the VLEI ecosystem and infrastructure, and then we can connect and put a program in place in order to be able to qualify external organizations, in order to be able to interact with legal entities, organizations, to be able to issue them VLEIs, to solidify their the digital equivalent of organizational identity using the LEI, and then to be in place to issue these role credentials that we just looked at the detail of what they would be comprised of. And so we have two types, that's okay, of VLEI role credentials. So the first one is the one that the kind that can be validated to be able to prove that a person is in some sort of official capacity as an officer or some sort of other official role within that organization, whether it is part and parcel of the fact that that role needed to be part of the organization in order to establish it as an entity legal form, or whether it was a role that through statutes or board resolutions or other official actions of a company established that role as an official role for that particular organization. So the important thing here is that we employ that network of qualified issuers of VLEIs to actually validate against independent sources that that person, that the organization is asking to be issued this official organizational role credential actually is that person and has that role. So part of the validation of before issuing an official organizational role credential is for the QVI, as we call them for short, to go out and to be able to independently verify that I am the registered agent of Glyph Americas. They can do that by means of going to a business registry or to be able to get certified notarized official documentation inside the firm for those kinds of entity legal forms that don't necessarily need to be listed or are not listed in business registries, in order to be able to prove that strong foundation that this person is related to this entity in this role and it has been checked. An example, a good example of an official organizational role credential is a role credential for a CEO. So most of the time, the CEO is the role and the person is named in the formation or the documentation that lives in the business registry. Or in the case of Glyph, the Swiss Foundation, actually in our statutes is where the CEO role is created. So an example would be for a CEO to get one of these and be able to perform both official duties and powers, and also to execute internal policies. And we've given some examples here. So outside facing official roles to be able to sign the annual report and send it on to the auditors, for example, to make regulatory filings like Sarbanes-Oxley, for example, signing and approving strategic plans internally, or even signing service awards for outstanding employees. As we took this journey, if we go to the next slide, we actually figured out that there was a much broader demand for another type of role credential. And this was a broader role credential that we've decided as a tongue twister to name engagement context role credential, because we create this credential to be able to represent the engagement that that particular person is having with that organization, whether they're an employee in a functional role, head of standards, VLEI software developer, for example, are examples of engagement context roles that Lance and I have with Glyph Americas. Contrasting the official organizational role that I hold on the business registry as registered agent and vice president of Glyph Americas. So that's the difference. These are usually use case specific and would be issued for a certain purpose. And we've given the example here of a company that has an authorized supplier program where a procurement manager is in place, goes through and authorizes certain suppliers in order to be able to deal with that firm, and gives them a credential that they ask that any invoices that's billed to the company be signed with, and to try to be able, for example, to cut down on invoice fraud. So this is a use case of a functional role credential being used. You go to the next slide. We mentioned trust over IP before, and I see that you're tracking the activities of trust over IP. We not for a moment thought that we would be able to establish the VLEI ecosystem and infrastructure without a governance framework. And the meta model that we chose was that of trust over IP. This is a rendering of the documents. There are actually 24 in total. There are 6 identifier and credential frameworks, three technical specifications, and there are actually 8 documents that are in the qualified VLEI issuer establishment, the program itself, and appendices that go with the agreement. So that's how we get to the 24. This is published on Glyph's website. I put the link on the bottom, and it pretty much describes how the credentials work, how the system, the root of trust was established using our autonomic identifiers, with Glyph sitting at the top of the chain of trust that we showed before, and how the various stakeholders, users, implementers, et cetera, need to act, and the requirements that they must meet in order to be able to continue to interact in the ecosystem and infrastructure for the VLEI. Let's turn over to the next slide. I think I'm coming to the end of mine here. And so I'll briefly stop and ask for questions on my part of the presentation before turning it over to Lance for the more technical part of the discussion and the interoperability work.
Yeah, just a comment, but I think the concept of the context role actually will become pretty popular and hopefully widely used for what it's worth.
Looks like Sam has asked a question or made a statement, rather.
Yes, I see. It says, for anybody who's not reading the chat, I remain disappointed that VLEIs are ACDCs, if I could, if I could paraphrase there. And then I see issuing credentials in all popular formats. Well, what we have decided to do is a related path, and I think that will become clear when we go into Lance's part of the presentation. But we wanted to be able to go into this new world in effect, and wanted to take advantage of the chaining the person in those roles to an organizational level credential that Glyph, that the QVI has issued to that organization. And then that could be verified by a change credential all the way back to the qualified VLEI issuer, so that you can see that they actually were qualified by Glyph in order to maintain that role, and then all the way back to Glyph if the verifier wanted to go all the way back. So it also has a role in being able, since these are organizational credentials, they're not to the individual as a person. They only make sense in the context of the interaction or engagement or representation that that person has with that organization. And so this allows the legal entity the ability, in order to be able to make the decision to issue and to authorize that decision, and also to decide when that credential should be revoked. Also, if duplicity or something catastrophic happens by revoking the legal entity level credential, all of the role credentials fall down, verifying after that, but of course, still verify for any of the use of before. So that's why we made the decision, in order to issue an ACDC and then do additional work similar to what Lance is going to present today. Is there anything else before we move on?
There was a question about a slide 16.
Yes, we at this particular point in time, most of the validation sources for the official organizational role credentials actually are names inside of a business registry, for example, or names on statutes or names on documents. So we decided to introduce the person identification as a string. We look forward and we would welcome the inclusion of a national identification number also to be used inside of a VLEI role credential, but only if there would be a path for the qualified VLEI issuer using that, based on that identifier that they would get from the legal entity, in order to be able to get back to the person so that they can verify and validate. I'm sorry, I shouldn't use verify, validate against the external documentation or independent documentation that they're looking for. So we introduced it as a string to be able to accommodate both of these at this point. Okay. So hearing no more, I guess I'll turn over to Lance.
Great. I also see Sam had a comment. ACDCs have nice internal credential chaining, but chaining is possible using external chains. Glyph risks losing market leadership in identifying orgs and org representatives to another body that isn't dogmatic about their technology choice. I do think that there is some fairness in that, although a lot of as people dive into kind of the VLEI ecosystem, which is built on top of Carry and ACDCs and those related technologies, there has been a ton of discussion in the community, like the BC data model community and things like that, in terms of kind of how these underlying technologies can coexist. And a lot of times there's sticking points in the details, right? I don't want to say the devil's in the details, but I would say just in general, this is kind of the broad stroke that I want to paint, is that the Carry ecosystem is kind of a first principles ecosystem in terms of security. And so when other formats and things like that if they hand wave on any of those security aspects, it can become a sticking point, and it has in the past. So as you'll see through my presentation, I think that there's a very strong desire within the carry and VLEI ecosystem to bridge to other ecosystems, the DID ecosystem, VC data model, all those. But at the same time, the details of doing that can be complicated. So I'm sure some of you are aware of kind of the past discussions that have been had. But yeah, I mean, we could maybe talk about some of those aspects, but why don't I go ahead and present, and then we can discuss more. Any kind of high level response for that?
You mean for me?
Or anybody? Yeah, it's more of a discussion than anything.
And this might not be the right time to have it. I am certainly not in charge of strategy at Glyph. So, but it's unfortunate. I think there's lots of good that could be done in the world, even with technologies that are not quite as first principles based. And that's what I lament, is that I think there could be a lot more progress that we could have been made in the meantime had a strategy allowed for a broader use, even with lower guarantees. I think would have been really nice to have an ecosystem, and we don't as a result of that. Is kind of just what I lament. So I don't want to derail what you're talking about, because I want to hear it.
In some ways, I feel like it's a good introduction to kind of what we're about to discuss with DID WebS, because it kind of is, the whole effort is related to this. And I guess if I were to say simply, I think that, well, I don't want to speak for Glyph in full, but I would just say that we would happily support as many formats as would support the requirements that we have. That's kind of the goal. So and like I kind of mentioned, there has been a ton of engagement between kind of the carry VLEI community and kind of the I don't want to call it legacy, but we'll say the DID based and VC data model based and OpenID communities. So there's no lack of trying is where I'll say for that. And so DID WebS is another attempt to try. And so this kind of shows the desire here that VLEIs want to be interoperable and portable. So there has from the beginning been the concept of VLEI being a network of networks. The kind of core feature, if you will, within the carry and VLEI ecosystem is that those identifiers are portable, so they don't live on a blockchain in the traditional sense. They are essentially micro ledgers of key state and the things necessary to manage an identifier, and then the related information like verifiable credentials. And so the idea is that doesn't preclude you from using a blockchain. So the reason that we're here is obviously Hyperledger. Hyperledger Indy would be something that we would want supported within the VLEI ecosystem, Ethereum, other blockchains. But then at the same time, be able to be portable and move your identifier, and specifically to have the root of trust of your identifier be essentially residing with you as the primary root of trust using cryptography. So let's see, discoverability and interoperability are achieved through the use of DID WebS. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. Let me close my chat screen. It's covering it up. Okay. And so, yeah, we'll get more to that. Any question in terms of the network of networks? Okay. So the VLEI approach and our key capabilities, security and interoperability of the key event receipt infrastructure. So that's Carry, which I've mentioned. Some of you are probably aware of it. Glyph has implemented Carry and the related technical capabilities to support fully decentralized and portable. That's one of the big terms, secure key management operations on self-certifying identifiers. That means essentially identifiers that you are the root of trust for. Let's see, issuance and verification and revocation of VLEIs do not need to operate on a blockchain. We said that. And we could essentially leverage any blockchain that we want. VLEI credentials are chained, so we talked about that a little bit. The ACDCs are essentially the verifiable credential format that we use, but specifically that stands for authentic chain data containers. And so it provides a cryptographic anchoring of organization identity securely and with certainty to a root of trust, the root of trust being very important in this case within the Glyph ecosystem. Chains, the ACDCs chain the credentials of the people who represent their organizations cryptographically to their organizational identity. It's similar to the concept of a chain of custody. So ACDCs provide a verifiable chain of traceability of the contained data. So you should be able to trace always, again, kind of with this microledger concept, you should be able to trace back the provenance of the data and cryptographically verify any chain all the way back to the identifier. There's a chain or tiered proof of authority, and this enables delegation of authority and the delegated authorizations. So often within the Carry ecosystem, so what we need to support, right, is these extremely complex relationships that can occur within any organization, across organizations, and within a supply chain or whatever it may be. So some of the core features that are built into Carry and ACDCs are things like multi-sig. So that's multiple signatures. You know, imagine within a corporation, you want to create an identifier for that corporation. Well, it has multiple, you know, board members or executives that have to be able to sign for any action to be executed by that corporation. So you essentially need multiple signatures in order to process an action by the company, right? No single member can execute that action, and so these much more complex relationships, you know, and I had mentioned the devil's in the details when you try to bridge between the Carry ecosystem and other SSI technologies. Often we find that delegation and multi-sig support is, I don't want to say ignored, but we'll say lacking in a lot of places. But in Carry, because of kind of the first principles and multi-sig first approach, that's native to kind of the ecosystem that we're building. So you'll see in DidWebS that we had to do some work, for instance, to be able to represent multi-sig as within a DID document. And not only is it multi-sig, but it's in Carry thresholded weighted multi-sig, meaning that you can have multiple signatures, and let's say that it's 5 possible keys related to a corporate identifier. You could specify that 3, as long as you have 3 of the 5 signatures, then the action can be completed, right? So you don't need all 5 signatures in order to complete an action, if that's how you specify it. And then you could also even put weights on signatures, meaning that, you know, maybe the signature of the CEO and the CTO would be enough for an action. But if you have the signatures of the CEO and two others, then that would provide the necessary weighted threshold in order to complete an action. So I hope that gives just an idea. I'm not trying to kind of bury it in complexity, but gives an idea of, you know, the real world use case of that Carrie's trying to solve. That's probably good for there. Any questions so far? Thoughts?
Yeah, so Sean, yeah, just a question around, so we've got the LEI. The LEI talks to the company. The VLEI, does that talk to the individual?
Yeah,
holistically?
that's a good question. So the LEI is an identifier that doesn't have a cryptographic basis. It is just an identifier similar to maybe the identifier you get as a person, you know, as a citizen. The VLEI,
Correct,
yeah, the VLEI is then kind of the digital manifestation of this that ties cryptography to an identifier and then associates essentially your LEI with kind of this digital cryptographic chain of trust, if that makes sense. So it builds, well, think of it this way. So if you're a citizen of a country, you're given your, I don't know what you would call it, social security number or identification number. Somebody might ask for that and you give it to them. The question is, do they really know it's yours? So then, you know, they'll ask you for maybe some form of identification. So you show them a plastic card or something like that has that your picture and your identifier, and then maybe your nation did something to try to make it difficult for you to, you know, create a fake form of that identification. Kind of that whole manual, you know, physical world process would be kind of where the LEI exists. So you know, there's some level of KYC and things like that, but there's no or there's limited amounts of kind of digital verification that can occur. The VLEI is kind of that whole digital infrastructure. So if you're familiar with kind of the DID ecosystem and verifiable credentials within that ecosystem, the VLEI is an implementation of that is that sits on top of, well, that has a technical stack that's like Carrie and ACDCs and things like that, but then also has a governance stack, which is what Carla was explaining in terms of what Glyph has established and Glyph and their partners have established to govern the LEI and the VLEI system. So hopefully that helps.
It's just sorry about the questions, but the VLEI is related to you cryptographically giving a person, in inverted commas, like a CEO, so his name and whatever additional attributes, you cryptographically give that individual something? Or is the VLEI the link between that person and the company?
That's a really good question. So because the stack is an SSI stack, the person retains control of the identifier in the sense that they know the secret for the cryptography that's underlying for that identifier. So when the CEO, only the CEO knows the secrets to their identifier, but the actual credential that's given within the VLEI system that says that they're the CEO. So we would call that like a VLEI credential, and that's why some of this jargon might be a little confusing. You know, the ecosystem is VLEI, but then they get this VLEI credential, and that VLEI credential has a special name that basically indicates that this is the organizational representative, you know, for the company. Essentially, they're the CEO, and so that credential is given to them during a KYC process and a process in which they do the digital steps to create their identifier and to go through challenge response and all these other things in order to receive that credential from what we call the QVIs, who are the ones who do the issuance for that credential. So that forms an entire cryptographic chain from the CEO all the way up to Glyph, and then that's now verifiable to anyone. So if that CEO were to sign a report, right, let's say it's the quarterly report for their company, using their VLEI, they now have a digital signature. Let's say it's a digital report. They can sign that digital report and maybe submit that to whoever we'll say the regulator is for their company. Let's say it's a financial institution. They can now submit that report, and it's cryptographically verifiable, right, with non-repudiation and things like that, that the CEO is the one who, signed the report for that company. Does that help, Sean?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, good.
So,
Sure.
can I ask a question or make a comment?
Please, yes.
I see the main problems with most of the approaches that depend on a cryptographic secret to be, impenetrability to the common man, meaning nobody wants to be vulnerable to a private key that is lost, stolen, or has to be kept secure in some environment. And people don't even know about this stuff. Meaning, if it's a common person, then the other comment that, so there has to be some alternative methods in order to secure that or to rotate that private key, which I know Kerry has, forward rotation and so on and so forth. But it's all based on the private key, public key pairs. It's not based on anything else. I think this is a fairly deep vulnerability in all of the schemes that I've seen so far. It will not fly in the real world.
So
it is not just securing the secrets, but having the secret be a secret, in the sense that, okay, so that is one thing. The second is CEOs will not get involved in this stuff. Believe
No,
me.
they won't. You're right. Absolutely not.
There has to be some form of, multiple responsible people securing this key for the company. Plus, there has to be a way to do away with, like, for example, if somebody leaves the company, then there has to be a way to say, okay, now the new person is X.
Yeah. So all right. What Vipin said, both points are so important that I'll have to interrupt because to throw my 10 cents on top of both of those. So in the real world, when we look at financial systems, we absolutely believe, I'll call it key management, is an insane thought to, in a sense, do verifications in any context. The notion of you holding a wallet with your keys in it is an insane thought. So in the real world, we have actually, over the last 50,000 years, come up with better models on how to do this. And yet in the technical world, we haven't actually implemented those patterns. So a perfect example, back to Vipin's point, is you have a real wallet that has money in it. If I come along and steal your real wallet, I might get $200, along with, unfortunately, probably some IDs that shouldn't be in there, but I might get $200 cash from you. But I won't be getting your IRA, your 401k, because you don't put that in your real wallet. So in a technical world or a digital world, the idea of putting, I'll call it valuable assets in any kind of I'll call it a wallet context is insane, because that's not what we do in the real world. So back to his point about, in a sense, securing, you can have an identity, a DID, whatever it's going to be, but it literally has to be, in a sense, only accessible through services that you authorize. The actual identity itself can't be present, in a sense, in any sense. You can't use it directly to sign documents. You need, in a sense, virtual services that surround it, in effect, so that it is, in a sense, protected. Yes, all the other things about rotating keys and everything else matter, using proxy IDs and all that. However, and there are third-party products, I'll say HashiCorp Vault and a bunch of other ones trying to do that, but even those need improvement for sure. But so there's a lot of missing maturity, as Vipin pointed out on part one. And I also agree with his second point on, in a sense, using the identities, in a sense, in a cleaner way, for sure, in the real world. And so it is frustrating to see the lack of maturity in some of these, I'll call it, design patterns that are moving forward with identity. For sure, we absolutely don't want to use them. Oh, the other thing is on wallets, as an example. Again, following up, even Ethereum has figured out that that's the wrong idea, is holding it in a wallet. So they came up with what I call the wallet service pattern as an EIP. So all of these things need to become, in a sense, secured services that have controls. To Vipin's point on signing things, yeah, not only is the CEO never going to do that, but that means you have to describe to me what your delegation capability is in this framework. So if I have authorities and capabilities, I somehow want to be able to designate or delegate some of those over to Vipin. And so far, I haven't heard anything on that either. So there's
that's not actually what the presentation was supposed to be on today. But if we want to spend the last 7 minutes doing that, I would be happy to do that, because we have thought of those kinds of things.
Okay, all right. Then the right answer is I don't want to ruin the last couple of minutes. If you just put the links in the chat, that would help me a lot. I appreciate it.
It'd be great if we could just do the did web part. I mean, that'd be, thank you.
Yeah, and just since I don't have time to address delegation and multi-sig and how that helps for recovery in a cryptographic world in a much easier, safer, more scalable way. Yeah, I just recommend spending some time with the VLEI and Carry ecosystem, learning about delegation and multi-sig, because I think that at least in part that will. We essentially face those same frustrations when we come to other ecosystems, is how I'll put it. And the Carry ecosystem, being first principles and wanting to essentially address exactly what you're talking about, is why Carry is built the way that it is. It has to be much more dynamic for corporations and the interactions between corporations and recovery. Essentially, you can never lose your organizational identity, right? It needs to remain safe at all times. But we could talk about witness networks and all these other things next time, I think, and I'll keep moving. Thank you. I do think that those are really important points. Let's see. So the VLEI can be used to sign many things. Carla mentioned that. And based on your role, you could also do login, verification, signing of reports. For instance, accountants could sign reports. People who reviewed those could sign the reports, and then you could have kind of a whole document signature from, let's say, a manager or a CEO or somebody like that. So there's kind of tiers of signatures you could imagine within a document. And then this is just what I wanted to touch on. And honestly, since we have 4 minutes, I think it's close enough to give this as an introduction. So right now we're working on a specification. It's just been submitted to the DID registry. And so that PR is out there. We call it DID WebS, and here are the core concepts. Essentially, DID Web is a familiar form of DID, and I've put that in yellow just because sometimes people misread DID Web and DID WebS. Sorry if you're colorblind, but if you're colorblind, just be careful to look at DID Web or DID Web with an S at the end. So DidWeb is familiar, and DidWeb trusts domains. And if you, we every day trust domains on the web. And so if that level of trust is sufficient for you, then you can both use DidWeb or DidWebS. So it's important to just understand that DidWebS is meant to fully support a DidWeb paradigm. So essentially, because DidWeb is familiar, then that makes DidWebS also familiar, because essentially those did documents will look very similar to how a DidWeb did doc looks. The difference is a DidWebS did document is verifiable using carry. So if you want to go to that level of verification and that level of security, you can. If you don't want to, you can just use DidWebS like DidWeb. So DidWebS, instead of trusting just domains and that level of security and certificate authorities and things like that, DidWebS trusts vanilla portable cryptography via carry, which we've talked about a bit. Again, if you don't want that level of support in terms of verification and assurance, then you can use the DidWeb form, no problem. And the cool thing for us on the carry side and the VLEI side is that DidWebS is a more discoverable did carry or just carry for our identifier. So that is nice for us, right? That essentially we can post the did documents for a carry identifier, whether that be an organization or a person or whatever it may be. We can post those as essentially a DidWeb looking identifier. And so it's something familiar for the did community. And in a lot of ways that if we use did documents, which is, you could almost think of it as an interface or an API, right? In some ways for key state and for service endpoints and things like that, you can know much less about the carry ecosystem, which is vast in terms of its implementation in order to support multi-sig, delegation, and all these other things. You get this simpler, maybe more familiar did web looking interface, essentially the did document. But at the same time, DidWebS is more secure than DidWeb. It uses carry. It has support for multi-sig. We'll be working on support for delegation and the other portions of the VLEI and carry ecosystems. And so the goal, that bottom bullet point, that DidWebS bridges the did ecosystem with the VLEI ecosystem. So if for instance, a DidCom connection, as long as that client supports DidWebS, and that should be fairly easy given that a lot of them would probably be able to support DidWeb, then you could set up a DidCom secure channel using DidWebS or whatever else you might be doing within the did ecosystem. So that's just the high level for DidWebS. And I know I'm out of time, but yeah, hopefully I'll put links for the specification and the reference implementation that we're building, and we'll be presenting some of that at IAW.
That's great. Thank you so much, Carla and Lance, for joining us. And if you're willing to send along the slides, I can add them to the meeting page. I think that would be great. So yes, and it does look like we are out of time, but thanks so much, Carla and Lance. Did you have any final words you wanted to end with?
I did. As Lance was finishing his presentation, I provided a short explanation to answer the question of where one finds the requirements of how not to, drag down the CEO of having to be responsible for doing this instead of their regular job, because this way of being able to authorize others within the organization and to give them credentials and give them requirements in order to be able to make sure that the qualified VLEI issuers are hearing from only the people who the legal entity is authorizing to interact with them on a daily basis, and ways to rotate them in and out of those roles are documented in the credential frameworks. And so I've given some background in the last posting on the chat. And
that's
the
perfect.
link is on the slide that I presented before on the ecosystem governance framework slide. So that will lead you on the Glyph website to where you can find those documents.
Great, thank you so much. And I've saved the chat, so I'll add that as well to the meeting page for anyone who wants to see those links and see the chat text. So great. Well, thank you so much, Carla and Lance. Thanks everyone for participating in the conversation and providing working group updates. And we look forward to seeing you all in 2 weeks. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.